So this is what we will be debating. It's about the influence of private money in public research, just to give it a shortcut. So on the one hand, you could say we have people who think that public-private partnerships, and we have a lot of them these days in Holland, are a good way to bring science to the market, basically, to make consumers and the products more science-based. And on the other hand, people think it's actually a threat to public research in terms of the independence of researchers and their research. But it also goes deeper. It also involves the agenda setting of research. So what are we actually researching, and should we be doing that kind of research or maybe something else? And then the third threat could be the credibility of nutritional health research. So these are kinds of part of the arguments that we could use. And so I've come up with one motion that I would, and that's the difficult part, the really difficult part here, I would want you to vote on from the audience. And it's about, it's this particular motion. So the audience comes first, audience comes always first for me. And it's, so the public-private collaboration in nutritional health research is a great idea. So who says, yes, public-private partnerships are a great idea? And who says no? And who says I don't know actually at this time? Interesting. Well, there is a few. Okay, that would give us some sense. So if you could go to the next slide. Dick Boer, if you would be so kind to come up to the podium. Hello. So I've picked out a few slides just to tease you. So this is, I took from your website. This is your priority areas, and I was looking for one that said making money, but it's not there. It's, oh, it's all making money. Okay, so, but you are very much concerned with healthy living. This is actually a press release from yesterday or the day before, that there will actually be food coaches running around in your local AHA store to help you pick the right food. This is another project. It says it's for school kids. It says Ik eet het beter. And so they teach school kids to eat yogurt and smoothies and vegetables and fruits. So if I go into my supermarket, this is what I actually see. They don't go to the fruit and salad bar, but they're somewhere else. And after the lunch is finished, this basically is what's left of the cola section. So this is the reality that kicks in here. I want to briefly, can you reflect a little bit on that?
The first one is what you show. The first slide you're shown, by the way, is our responsible retailing agenda. That's maybe not making the money. It's not our shareholders' promise, maybe, but it is a shareholders' promise, because we believe that all stakeholders need to be part of our company and not only our shareholders. So responsible retailing, where you saw the elements of, is clearly the role we play in the society, as well in our business in the US, where we have the majority of our business in supermarkets, versus the Netherlands. So that's why responsible retailing is so at the heart of our business, because we are in the midst of society with our business everywhere where we operate. And that's why we also feel that the role we play in health or responsible retailing in communities or in CO2 emission reductions is so important, because we can play a very prominent role to our customers. What you see here is, of course, a logical consequence of being a retailer. We cannot sell only healthy products. We need to help our customers to find and to select the healthy products. And that's why we do all the efforts, as you refer to, at schools, at stores, to help our customers to select the right products. And at the end, of course, it's their choice if they, by the way, the good thing is you see only one bottle of water, so must be the rest for salt. So at least that's a good thing. There's still more Red Bull on the shelf than water. So I think that's also a good thing.
All right. But you do think the two go well together, making money basically, because obviously
yeah, for sure. Then they need to go together. We are not We're not in a business only for charity. And I personally believe if you make money, you can invest it back into a better society. I think that's where it all counts. So it would be bad if we would not making money and we can't invest in a society. So I think that's also our role we have to play.
So getting rid of the Coca-Cola is not an option?
That's not an option. I think we need to help our customers to choose. We need to help them to choose in the right way. And I think that's where the industry in general, by the way, has a responsibility, not only we as a retailer, but also the food industry. And I think there's a lot still to gain and to win in helping customers to select the right products at the right time. And indulge is part of that. So that's also one of the things we believe.
Okay, that's good to know. If you could take your place at the table. Okay, so our next guest is Jos Engelen. Oh, there he is. So I'm going to tease him a little bit as well. This is also a very recent slide from Mr. Engelen signing something that he could maybe reflect a minute on, a new contract for knowledge and innovation. And this is coming out of that. It says how many billions of private money and public money will be pooled in a way into a common research agenda. And then so there's, on the third line, agri-food. So there's 90 million from the private sector and 60 million from the public sector. And in the health area, it's of course much broader than food, but it's 140 and 114. And so if you go to the innovation agenda, and the translation is mine, so if I'm wrong, it's my fault. But it basically says that the two parties work together to grow exports. And another thing is that it wants to tune public research to business and consumer demands, or society's demands, as they call it. But it's basically bringing together public and private. So my question to Mr. Engelen is, don't you find it striking that a public research should be caring about exports or making money for the country, basically?
Well, the public research should certainly care about the country's competitive position, and if that competitive position is good, a good export might be part of that. What you show here is a reflection of what's called economic top area policy that was started by government something like 5 years ago. And the idea was, in fact, to pool knowledge at academia and at private companies and see where synergy could take place. So we have started carefully in sort of an experimental way. And in fact, this has gone very well over the past 5 years, and we have just signed for the third time such a cooperation contract. So it is very beneficial for both. One particular example came to mind when I was listening to the talks and also to what is at stake in this particular field that we are discussing here, is that through these public-private partnerships in the area of agri-food, the scientific results will be published, open access, I hope, but at least it will be transparent. So these collaborations lead to a transparent process on what is good and what is bad science. And again, in such an important area as food, this is very important. So that is an additional benefit of this cooperation that I very much believe in. Okay,
disclaimer, you're not a food scientist, you're a physicist, right? So
yes.
I guess you may want to say that to the people too.
Yes, what I study is that.
Okay. All right, so if you could take your place at the table, then, well, my third guest you have seen already, of course. I want to freshen his memory a little bit. This is a recent article in the New York Times. And there was actually also a letter to the editor that followed this. It says, the scientific nonsense from Coca-Cola is outrageous, and it was signed by Walter Willett. So much for academic language here. It's, I guess you're the Donald Trump of the debate today. It's, So this is another thing that your name came up with. I'm not sure whether you recognize the image, but most Dutch people will. And this was all about a research story a few years ago about research from Wageningen University Research Center about the amount of milk people should drink, basically. And it's not in this part, but it was funded in part by the dairy industry in Holland. And you were quoted as saying it was misleading and an extreme distortion of the result. So, as just an introduction to your first statement on our today's motion, public-private partnership in research, in nutritional health research in particular, is that a great idea in your mind? I'll hold it.
To make it simple, I'll say no, with some qualifications. And part of this does come out of my experience with seeing the dark side of industry, private money funding research. For example, in the sugar-sweetened beverage area, David Ludwig and actually some other people have done this too. Look at studies, summary of studies that were funded by the industry and that were funded with public money. And the industry money shows no harm. Those studies show no harm. The studies funded by public money show harm. And the difference is statistically significant between those. And I think that comes about for multiple reasons. There's many things that can be done to bias what the public sees. Sometimes studies showing adverse effects, or in the drug area, it's very clear that negative studies tended not to get published, and the literature is really biased. There's been some attempts to fix that or remedy that. The industry has often funded studies that are weak and underpowered and almost guaranteed to give non-significant results when the companies wanted non-significant results. Also, industry funding has biased, has silenced investigators. This came up very clearly in the area of sucrose polyesters, where Procter & Gamble, like Unilever, both developed their sucrose polyesters, which are going to be fat substitutes that are not absorbed. And Unilever appropriately looked at the data on absorption of carotenoids and said they're not going to develop it as a commercial product. Procter & Gamble in the US went ahead with that, invested billions, and we drafted a letter to send to the FDA, and really, to my surprise, found almost none of the people, one person with an exception, in the carotenoid research area would sign that letter. They had all received funding by Procter & Gamble. It wasn't that they were saying it was good, it was that they kept silent at a time that they should have raised their voices for the public good. More recently, Coca-Cola has been has actually put a lot of money to some researchers to discredit other, not just criticize the, or say there's a lack of association, but actually criticize the whole field, trying to undercut the credibility of science. They say, without going into detail, you can't measure energy intake closely enough to look at energy balance. And actually, it's in my textbook. We can't do that. But they then said, therefore, you can't believe anything about what people report about their diet, or in fact, anything self-report about anything. It turns out there was a review in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. One of the chief people making these criticisms had received $5 million from Coca-Cola, and there's a handful of scientists now who are in that group. So there are some very big downsides, I think, to private funding if it's done the wrong way. Now, it's especially problematic where industry is funding to look at the effects of their product. The potential for bias is huge. Funding basic science research, very little likelihood for problems. Funding work like you're doing, looking at how can we influence behavior toward making healthy choices, where you're not selling just one product, Coca-Cola, you're giving people some options. I think there's a lot less room for bias there. Building firewalls, I'm sure you're dealing with that in some ways, but there are some very, very dark sides to this if we're not very careful.
Okay, thank you. So dark sides, Jos Engelen. I mean, suppose we would find that eating meat is not a good idea for your health. Would it still be a good idea to raise meat exports from the Netherlands to the rest of the world? Because that's one of the targets, basically, from the innovation agenda.
Yeah, if the rest of the world keeps on wanting to drink Coca-Cola or eat milk, then I don't know what happens. As scientists, it's our responsibility to underpin such a conclusion with good, verifiable, reproducible, replicable research. And then you have a scientific result that the world can do with it whatever it likes. But at least the result is objectively true. That is important. As far as public-private partnerships are concerned, I voted for, obviously. There are extremes, of course. There are extremes in contract research. Public-private partnerships are not contract research. There are extremes where the private sector carries out research alone, but the private-public partnerships combine the best of both worlds. And scientific results, even if in a very, very complicated and never finished area as agri-food, scientific results should be in the open, verifiable, and then you draw your conclusions.
Mm-hmm. And if industry is at the same table as public researchers, where they determine what's the agenda, what's on the agenda for our research, what is important to do research in now, is that something that private people should have a say in, or is that something where...
Yes, obviously, and the private people we talk to are then the scientists and the research leaders, managers also, of the research departments of the companies. And of course, let me give you one example. We have one very successful company producing machines for the chip industry. Mm-hmm. And they can write little structures now of 30 nanometers. Even 10 years ago, that was completely unthinkable. When we were building the Large Hadron Collider, we were very proud to be able to do that with 250 nanometers, by the way. So there's huge progress. They can do that. They're world leader. They have a turnover of billions. I don't know how many. They see that they're hitting the boundary of what they can do. And they have set up a lab, the Advanced Research Center for Nanolithography, that is private, publicly funded, in order to attract academic researchers with the challenge, show us how to write smaller structures. And that involves a lot of fundamental science, physics, that these researchers are very happy to do. And they don't know where they will end. They know what the goal is. And that is a fantastic way of serving the interest of that company and doing challenging science.
Right. But you managed to steer away the questions from eating meat to great machines and nanometers. I mean, they may be a different problem. I mean, if
eating meat, again, if it is bad for you, it would be very, very complicated to come up with a very clear conclusion there, I think. But let's imagine that it is bad for you, that you shouldn't do it. Then, of course, we could imagine that behavioral scientists and other scientists, what we call alpha gamma in this country, that they work out ways of communicating this to the public. Don't do it, it is bad for you, but it's bad for you, it's bad for the country. So there also science could be involved.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Dick Boer now. So the motion, is it a great idea, public? I mean, you have someone voting no, someone voting yes, so what's your position?
I personally vote yes, because I think it is good that we, public and private, are working together. I think what you need to have is independent authority of the scientists to give their research out, so they shouldn't be bound by the funding of the private money. I think that we should always avoid. I think it should be an open and research. And if you are manufacturer or whatever, you should be open for that, because you want to discover, together with scientists, a much better way forward. And I think that's where, to my opinion, the real issue is. If it feels you can't say anymore what you really find, I think then we are in the wrong then we are in the wrong territory, and I think that should be not the case, to my opinion. And I think that's what it is.
You're dealing with a lot of food manufacturers as a retailer. Do you see the potential for influencing public research in a way that you wouldn't see fit?
I think I can't comment for the food industry. Let's be on the other hand, and I think it's easy to complain about it with all of us. I'm not saying that Mr. Willett is doing that, but I understand if that pressure comes to you and you start having not the right answers anymore public, then I think we're on the wrong space. I don't want to comment on what the industry is doing. I would say something else. I think with the help of scientists and the industry, we have been developing over the last 50 or 100 years a food availability for the world, which is better than it was 100 years ago. So let's also not forget what we have achieved. There are negative aspects of food maybe today which we didn't know 50 years ago. We preach it here, 3 glasses of milk. I was born with that, and I'm still here. So maybe good that I was drinking 3 glasses of milk a day. But we don't know maybe what we can't know today. And I think the industry also still, I think, is very open to understand better how we can help say our society to start living healthier. Because I think we all find out that, and I think that's the other point, what we eat. When we eat too many calories, we can exercise what we want. I think it's also a story which we know, but it's difficult to keep up with exercising your calories you take in. And I think that's a balancing life we have to have. So less calories in with the life you live today, which is different than 50 years ago. I think that's also an issue. Yeah.
You want to respond to any of these two?
A little bit. I think industry, of course, is not homogeneous. There's good guys and there's bad guys. And there are some really bad guys, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and among the worst, that are really selling products and promoting products that kill people prematurely, that give young people diabetes, that will impose great suffering on them and shorten their lives. And they are evil, and they are pushing their products and using every kind of deception and strategic way to change the public perception that they can. And part of the research community has gone along with that and taken that money. So that is a real problem there. But again, there are people who are producing healthy products. And actually, those I try to avoid taking money from them, because the public perception, when we say they're healthy, if we've taken their funding, actually will, in many people's minds, undercut the credibility of what our findings. Actually, we had that occur just recently. We published a study showing some long-term beneficial effects of consumption of nuts, and the postdoctoral fellow doing that research had received some funding from the nut industry. The study itself was not funded that way, but even that brought down a bunch of negative press, which was unfortunate. So there's there's a lot of distrust, and we don't want to undercut where we really have good products as well. But again, there's not a simple answer to this question. I think I quite understand that the industry often brings legitimate questions. They should want to know about the long-term consequences of their products. And oftentimes we can do that. They're not in a position to do that kind of research. But there's some models. Ideally, it would work if the industry said, we would like to get these answers. The public institutions took that money, made a call, let people apply for funds to study it, so the review is independently conducted. And I think that really would build a firewall that would be pretty good. But this sort of direct money of the beverage industry into research has had lots of negative consequences.
And the sharing of an agenda, I mean, have one common research agenda, could that be a good idea in any way?
I think it's useful to have inputs from all players, but the agenda can get distorted as well. Clearly, Coca-Cola is trying to say, putting money into physical activity promotion. Of course, we all agree that that's a good idea, but essentially to take the attention away from the damage that they're doing. That's one of the strategies. In fact, they set up an institution on healthy weight control, and as it turns out, the website, all was focusing on physical activity. It turned out the website was actually at Coca-Cola. Mm-hmm. So again, it's a complex picture where we have some really good things can be done. Some studies, public money would usually not, reviewers would usually not fund a study looking specifically at effects of nuts or some other products, where that research should be done, and it's legitimate for industry to put some money into the pot to get that done.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes, just to make clear, the public science agenda in this country and science policy supports public-private partnerships, as I explained, but it's not only that. So you should have enough room for unsteered, free research, basic research. In addition, that is very clear, also to invent the innovations of the future, obviously. So this is part of the Dutch science policy, with all the requirements of publishing openly and all that, and of course with the obligation for the scientists to behave ethically, even if they don't work in public-private partnerships. From time to time someone derails, that happens, unfortunately. But the science agenda is larger and should leave enough room for the fundamentally interested biologist or chemist who wants to go deeper into the reasons of your findings, for example.
And that prevents private money from hijacking the public research agenda, you think?
Yes, you seem to be afraid of that, but in the discussions with the employers' organization in the Netherlands 5 years ago, one might get the impression, but probably the chairman was just provocative into my direction because I was a beginner. But these discussions led to a mutual understanding, but also common signatures under a manifesto to the government to also increase funding of public research, and then also to give incentive to public-private partnerships. So we are in this together.
It's both.
Yes.
You want to respond to any of this?
Yeah, I think, by the way, the combination we do now in Holland with Stopsector and anything else, I think is targeting even better the money private sector is spending together with the public sector than ever before. So let's also not see it from a negative side, as long as we are transparent and objective. And I think that's what we have agreed also with the employers' organization and the government. And I think that should go on. I think that's making at least sense, to my opinion.
Okay, are there any questions in the audience for any of these panelists?
Dick Boer mentioned the importance of shareholders' value, and I want to make one comparison. Like there are a lot of supermarkets who promote beer in supermarkets, and it's 10 euro cents per crate of beer goes to the shareholders, the net dividend, and 25 euros goes to the bill to society for unhealthiness. So you have a big difference between the profit for the shareholders and this damage to society. And should we find there a better balance?
So it was a balance between shareholders and what we. So I didn't get the question exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah.
It's basically the question that we began with.
Yeah. No, I think it is. It's a challenging subject, I would say, on influencing customers in healthy living, and balancing healthy life. And of course, we as retailers, we promote at the same time the qualified, maybe not so healthy products versus the very healthy products. We have clearly said in our own agenda, we want to get at least in 2020, 1/3 of our products have a healthy stamp sold in our stores, which is an enormous challenge because we know where we come from. And we also have said we want to influence customers in the stores, everywhere they are, even in schools, to help them to understand what healthy life means. And I think there is, by the way, a great opportunity between science and retailers and manufacturers to get a much better understanding what health is, because I think we're still on the early stage on that. And that's the way we think we can contribute to it. And of course, yeah, we have a shareholder responsibility too, as I said in the beginning. if we are not making the money, you end up with retailers who can't offer even that other responsibility to the customers either. So that's why, yeah, we need to have that balance between investing into our shareholder proposition, so return money to shareholders, and investing into customers.
All right, thank you. So, well, the time is very limited, so we have to stop here. I want to check whether any of you have changed your minds, and I'm going to do it the simple way because the other one is just is not foolproof. So if you could raise your hands, who has changed his position if I would say, well, it's either yes or no? Has anyone here changed his or her position considering what has been said right here? Just one, maybe. We need only one. Well, I'm afraid you didn't manage to convince anyone, and so. But I think you had a great debate, and I think I really enjoyed the arguments that were being given. So thank you very much.